Okay, welcome to another SEO Hangout with Josh Bachynski. That would be me. Today I have a bunch of really good leaks from Google and some really good information, so I'm just going to jump right into it. As we know, we've been having the SEO apocalypse this summer, and so I have a lot more stuff on that. So the first thing is a lot of people are wondering, good content obviously is very important these days for SEO. You have to make sure your users are satisfied with the content that they find. Not only satisfied, but preferably delighted with the content they find, so that they'll be willing to share it and recommend it on the places like social and even possibly make links, even though really no one does that anymore these days. The question is, though, how do I make content better? Well, it's really simple. There's a simple recipe you can follow. And it's all comes down to the user experience. So to benefit that, to boost that up, these are some of the things you can do. Well, one, you can have a fast server and a fast design. Nothing is worse, of course, than waiting 8 or 9 or 10 seconds to get to a site. So make sure you check your Google Analytics site speed under the site content section, and make sure that people, wherever they are in the world, can see your content within 2 seconds or so. And again, not only that has to do with your server and the backend architecture, it also has to do with your design as well. The design can't be too overladen and too heavy with different images and whatnot. The next thing is no scrolling. There's been plenty of research that shows that if people have to scroll, that you're going to lose people, that people don't scroll far enough, or they don't feel like scrolling, or if they don't see what they want in the first couple seconds above the fold, it's called, then they're not going to use the content. So you have to make sure that the main content, the main information that you want this searcher, this website user to get, has to be above roughly 500 pixels, which apparently a study last year, the year before, said was around the fold. You'd have to check your analytics to see what actually the fold is for your users, but as a general rule of thumb, people use 500 pixels. The next one is planning each page. This is not to be underestimated how important this is. Each page has to have a plan of what it's supposed to be about. This is extremely important to make sure that you have a one-to-one correlation between a search phrase and the page, what it's going to deliver. So if people are going to my site looking for green apples, that page, the green apples page, that I want to rank for green apples has to be all about green apples and has to be dedicated to that topic, preferably. It'd be best if it wasn't about 2 or 3 different topics. You can get away with that, but the more the page is dedicated to that topic, the easier it'll be to make sure that people are enjoying that content. The next thing, as I said, is you have to delight them. You don't just want to satisfy the users. You want to make them just completely agog over your beautiful, cool-looking design. Google has harped on us tons and tons of times to make sure that your design is new and fresh and cool-looking. So that you delight end users. So not just they're satisfied, but they're really pleased with the design, and they might even actually want to share it because it's so cool. Speaking of which, how would they share it? Well, you want to have call to actions for them to use the social buttons. Not only do you just want your buttons on the page somewhere, you want a big arrow pointing at them and say, please share us, or pay with a tweet kind of concepts where if there's special content you have, they only get it if they pay with a tweet, or pay with a like, or pay with a +1. I've asked Google, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with, there's everything wrong with asking for a link, but there's absolutely nothing wrong, according to their guidelines, but there's absolutely nothing wrong, according to their guidelines, or otherwise, for asking people to share you, to like you, to +1 you, to repin you, retweet you, whatever it is. So you can use the pay with a tweet methodology, and you can extrapolate that and change that to suit your purposes. And even if you don't have that, make sure on the sidebar there's always a big, almost blinking sidebar with a +1 or a like button with an arrow saying, please like us, it will save a baby panda, or something. Even if you're being sarcastic or funny, that will help get these shares and these likes. Moving right on to that perfect segue, all the text on your page, all the content has to have a voice. It has to be funny, it has to be sarcastic, it has to be recognizable, it has to be written with a consistent voice they can recognize and hopefully like. Hopefully they like this voice, right, that you're writing the content in. And then they will be that more apt to enjoy it, read it, come back, look at it, and share it and recommend it. Next technical tip, of course, is to use authorship. Use the authorship snippet to make sure you connect your authorship snippet with your Google Plus profile. And also on the index page, you can use the authorship snippet. If it's kind of like an article kind of page or like a long text page, you can use an author snippet. But you can also use your connect your Google Plus profile to the main web, the index page, and make sure in Webmaster Tools you click OK for that reciprocal link. And then your publisher snippet, which is just like an author snippet, but it's called the publisher snippet, it'll show up for the index page too. So you make sure you do that to get better click-throughs through the SERPs. And the next one is video. All your content doesn't have to be text. It can be images, it could be video. Sometimes they say a picture says 1,000 words, and that's definitely true. Sometimes pictures are way more shared and way more viewed and way more engaged with, because you can just look at the picture, you can see it, you can find it funny or beautiful or whatever right away without having to read a big long article. If you're writing articles, make sure they're like the top 5 tips, top 10 tips, those kinds of articles. But at the same time, you have to make sure that those have meat. Even if it's a short article, and even if it's your top 5 or top 10 tips, it has to have meat. Ultimately, when it comes down to all of this, you have to answer the question that the user wanted. You have to answer the question that whatever it is they were searching for on Google, you have to provide that information. Not only provide that information, you have to provide it in full so that they're not curious anymore, they're not going to search anymore. You have to terminate the search cycle. They go to Google, they search for something, they click on a result, hopefully yours, because your snippet is optimized to be enticing and have a good call to action for them to click on it. Okay, they'll click on it. What's this green apples thing? And then they read about it, and that's exactly what I needed. Good. Close the tab, close the browser. Or they go back to Google and search for something else entirely different. They don't refine their search. They don't click something else, heaven forbid, because that will definitely, if that happens too much, that will definitely, the tests are starting to show, that will definitely hurt your rankings. And ultimately, when it comes down to making better content and trying to beat Panda, which is the main content algorithm, the quality algorithm, not for analyzing what the page is about, but for analyzing how good it is, right? You have to watch your analytics. For those of you who think that analytics is a super secret way that Google's going to spy on you, trust me, they already have all that information. All you're doing is not giving yourself access to the information they already have access to. So I would definitely go and install analytics or some other sufficiently robust analytics tool, but Google Analytics is free, and it's made by the same company that you're trying to rank with, so it gives you kind of some hints as to what possibly Google search might be looking for. And I would watch it like a hawk and make sure that your click-through rates are what they should be. If you're making changes, that you're not getting too high bounces. If you're making changes, people seem to be enjoying the pages. And probably the 2 biggest friends in Google Analytics that nobody talks about, that are probably way more important than everything else, other than click-through rate, which is also Webmaster Tools, would be the in-page analytics and the in-flow analytics. So the in-page analytics you can find in the content section, and it will tell you where people are clicking on the page. This is invaluable information for you to tell if users are actually enjoying your page or not, right? If they're finding the links they're supposed to link to, or if you can see I always find weird little problems where, for example, on the index page, you still have the logo and a homepage link. And people are going to the homepage, and they're clicking on the index page and the homepage link when they're already on the homepage. Why are they doing that? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but quite often I find it's because they're not finding what they want. So yeah, just show me what I want, and they're just clicking around because they don't know what this page is about, and they're not getting the information that they want. So that spells a problem right there. So watch for your in-page analytics. It'll tell you a whole bunch of information about what's going right with your web pages and what's going wrong with your web pages. The next one is page flow. It gives you a much better idea of the flow of traffic on your site, where they're coming from, where they're dropping off, how many are dropping off, and where they're ending up. I find that it's a good visual representation, and it gives you kind of a 10,000-foot view, but the 10,000-foot view is so well laid out that it kind of gives you all the information there. You don't need to go digging into bounce rates and exit rates, which in Google Analytics, quite frankly, are extremely hard to understand for the most part. Speaking of which, that's another perfect segue. Today will be Segue Day. To Google Analytics. I just was talking about analytics. I talk about analytics a lot, and all my regular listeners will know that I talk about analytics. However, there's a lot of things about analytics that I want to make sure we're clear that suck. They suck. SUK, suck. Google Analytics, a lot of the metrics in it aren't very good. For example, average time on page completely sucks. Also, the bounce rate is hard to understand, and the exit rate is hard to understand. The way they calculate these percentages, and they're mildly misleading. If you want to get away from those kinds of problems, and it was for like average time on page, for example. So getting back to that, so average time on page, for example, the way it works in Google Analytics is every time a page loads, it loads the JavaScript that tells analytics some information. So the only way that they can tell that you have had an average time on page is when a user goes to a page and then clicks on another page, and they can track the time difference between those two. But what happens, Josh, you ask, if they go to a page and then they go back to Google? Well, Google cannot tell you. Google Analytics then cannot tell you what the average time on page was for those oh so important SERP bounces. The reason being is because there was no second page hit on your site to trigger the code again, so they can do a time differential, right? They trigger the code once, they know the user came there, and then disappeared. They don't know what happened. They don't know if it went to another site, went back to Google. They don't know what happened because they can't track that, right? So this is not preferable for diagnosing these SEO kind of algorithms that are coming out. So I would recommend, there is a solution, however, in Google Analytics. It's called events. I would recommend coming up with, so do a search for Google Analytics events and read about how all it works. It's fairly complex, but if you're kind of a do-it-yourselfer, you will definitely want to check this out. If you want more information on how this works, kind of explained to you, by all means you can contact me, and I'll give my contact info before I forget, because I forget almost every broadcast. My contact information is joshbachynski@gmail.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter @joshbachynski, and my YouTube, which you probably already know where it is because you're probably watching this here, but however, my YouTube is youtube.com/jbachyns, JBACHYNS. So, if you want more information about events, or quite frankly, anything related to SEO, or anything I've talked about in this SEO rant, hangout, by all means contact me. But yes, so the average time on page in Google Analytics, unfortunately, is a lie. That's why you get 0.00000 seconds, is because I recently learned, is because you don't have one instantiation from the next instantiation, and so they have no idea how long it took for the user to bounce off the site. Now, that information is still a little bit useful because, if you have if you know you're not converting on your index page, because there's no way to convert on your index page, there's no phone number, there's no click here to call us. They have to move from the index page to a sub page in order for you to convert. Well, at the very least, then, if you have 5,000 different visitors who landed on your index page and all have an average time of 0, and therefore the bounce rate will be 100%, and the exit rate will be 100% as well, because that means they all bounced. They all exited off the index page. This is a problem. So sometimes when it's so blatantly bad, you don't need that much more fine granularity to tell what's going on. But quite often you will want this more fine granularity to tell what's going on. So I would recommend installing Google Analytics Events. It's a piece of code that you put onto the page like you would put Google Analytics. And I would recommend something like this. You can get it to trigger every 5 seconds. And you can also tell it to trigger on various places in the code, like on the top of the page, in the middle of the page, and the bottom of the page. You can tell how far they scrolled. After you compile all this information, and you can look at it in Google Analytics, you can start to get a much better picture as to how long they actually spent on the page, because this event will trigger every 5 seconds. So you'll know at least down to the 5-second mark how long they spent on the page, and you can also tell how long they scrolled, so you can tell whether or not they're using the page or not. With that data, you can get a much better idea of what users are enjoying your pages, what pages they're not enjoying, and when they're bouncing off these pages. And I can give you a much better idea both how to diagnose if you were hit by Panda, but also how to fix Panda by getting a baseline and then making changes and see if things get better. Okay, speaking of Panda and usage metrics, again, I told you this is Segue Day, or something like that. Chrome. there's been a lot of talk about Chrome and exactly how much information Google can extract out of it to use for ranking data. Of course, there's a bunch of people who used to work for Google who now are SEOs. People like Pedro Diaz, I believe his name is, and Fili Weiss, or Weiss. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their names correctly. I apologize to these guys, not that they would ever watch my video, but in case they do, I apologize. Trust me, I understand. My last name is Bachynski. I understand people butchering your last name. These ex-Googlers, they strongly suggest that Google is tracking everything in Chrome. So I can provide the exact video where they suggest this, but they said, and I quote, well, I'm paraphrasing, but it's a very close paraphrase, that if Google has the chance to track it regarding Chrome, they do. They track everything. If they can track it, they track it. And there's no reason why they can't track everything. They can't track and aggregate all the signals in Chrome. And if you ask any, so the ex-Googlers currently, they strongly suggest that Google is tracking this. The current Googlers, like John Mueller and Matt Cutts, whenever asked the question, they avoid that question like the plague. They mumble, and they go move on to something else. That immediately tells me something is going on there. Current Googlers do imply, for example, like John Mueller, he has implied in Hangouts, like the one on July 5th, for example, that copying and pasting a URL and making your URL easy to copy and paste, quote unquote, or browser bookmarks would all be a wonderful and awesome signal of a good site. And Matt Cutts has specifically stated at SMX Advanced that he will look at, and I quote, any ranking signal, end quote, to tell him whether or not it's a good site or not. So if they have access to it, they will track it. And these ex-Googlers who have worked for Google suggest they do. They do. The one, they do have access to everything in Chrome, and two, they do track it. So if this is the case, what kind of inference could we draw from this? Well, tests are ongoing by SEOs, enterprising SEOs, to see whether or not this is the case. But you don't have to wait for these tests to be done, and who knows if these enterprising SEOs will even, if they find a gold mine of SEO information like that, if they even share it with you. But you don't need to wait for that information if this is the case. We can do some, this is not rocket science, right? There's only so many steps that Google can take to rank a site. We can do some creative thinking and some brainstorming here and come up with probably what they'd be using. So let's see. If you want to make sure that your user interaction is good, these are the kinds of things that you would have to worry about. Well, first off, you want to make sure you ask the user to bookmark you. If they're tracking bookmarks, it'll help you to rank. And even if they're not doing that, if people bookmark you, presumably they'll be coming back when they check their bookmarks. So at least you'll get a little bit of extra traffic, right? So there's no better way to get bookmarks from your site. You know what I'm talking about, bookmarks. And I'm not talking about like social bookmarks, like those websites. I'm talking about the bookmark feature, or favorites for you IE users. Who are you anyway? Don't you know it's 2013? Yeah, so ask them to bookmark you, right? Get a call to action. Say, please bookmark us, come back. Offer an incentive. You can incentivize return visitors for either just for Chrome or for all the different browsers. And don't forget, Google has its hooks into Firefox too. They dump a lot of money into Firefox, and they have for years, and they do have a data sharing agreement with them. If you read your terms and conditions when you installed Firefox, so you would have noticed this. Or the Google toolbar, at least. So yeah, you can also use JavaScript to get bookmarks as well, by the way. And make sure if you're using JavaScript for any shady SEO purpose, make sure you always robot out that JavaScript. That way Google, in theory, shouldn't be able to tell what it is that JavaScript is doing, unless that JavaScript renders to the canvas. Because if it does, they use canvas bots to be able to actually see what's on the canvas, so that's not going to work. But if the JavaScript, they'll be able to see all that. But if the JavaScript is roboted out and it does something like make a bookmark, well, then that might be a little bit better. Yeah, and as I was saying, you can also incentivize visitors to return. You can say on exit that they will get 10% off if they come back as a returning visitor bonus or something along those lines. You can also incentivize them bookmarking you. You can say anyone who bookmarks us and can prove it will get 10% off. There's nothing wrong with that. You can ask. That's not against Google's guidelines. You can ask for all that kind of stuff. And don't forget to always have call to actions to share it, to recommend it. Say, copy and paste in emails to a friend and we'll give you 10% off or something along those lines. Incentivize and provide instructions and use call to actions. You would be amazed as to how much, if you make it with enough incentive, and if you make it blatantly obvious enough and easy enough to do, you'll be amazed what web users will do for a percentage off, or for some kind of interesting secret or interesting information. Or you have to be creative, but but it is possible to not only make a great site, you have to be creative there, but to incentivize and market your site. Great. Okay, so the next. Here's another thing. I have no segue for this one. It's a different topic. Segue days are okay. There's a lot of people who are having trouble, and recently someone asked a question in a Google Webmaster Hangout that they can't rank their site for brand. They have a big brand. They think they have a big brand, a big enough brand anyway, but their site's not even ranking for brand. So what that means is, say they're running redapples.com. Their site is not even, and Red Apples Inc. is their business name. Their site is not even ranking for Red Apples. Redapples.com does not show up when you type in Red Apples. Now, I just want to say, if this is going on, you have to contact an SEO professional. That means there is multiple algorithms that are affecting this site. Probably Panda, probably Penguin, maybe payday loans, maybe a manual action, or some combination thereof. At least 3 of them. There's at least 2 or 3, probably 3 or even more of these algorithms going on affecting that site. If you can't get redapples.com, and Red Apples Inc. is a well-known business, or at least well enough known in your area, and you can't get it to rank for Red Apples, because that means that Google has so little trust in your site, and the algorithms have noticed so many bad, negative things that other stuff is just going to float to the top. Especially if you're dancing as well. One day you can see it there, and one day you can't. And trust me, I've had big customers who this has happened to, and I've been able to fix it. But it required an in-depth SEO analysis, and it required a lot of work in a lot of different areas. So don't just jump the gun. Don't just, I know I've said this rant many times, but people keep doing it. Don't just assume it's links and then disavow all your links. Don't submit a reconsideration request and think that'll fix it all, because it's probably a reconsideration request. Don't think it's the flavor of the month. All these algorithms still work, and they work over time. It's not just because you just heard about Penguin 2 that it is Penguin 2. It might be, but it doesn't mean it is. You need to get a professional who diagnoses it for you. Otherwise, you're going to waste months and months and months and months of doing the wrong thing. You might even make things worse if you disavow the wrong links or those kinds of things. So make sure you get an SEO professional, like myself, or someone else who knows what they're talking about, to do an in-depth analysis for you. That's why it won't rank. That's why you can't get it back. Not because Google is a bunch of bastards, although they more or less are. Some of them, not all of them. But because you haven't properly diagnosed it. SEO is far, far more complex than it was this month, never mind last month, never mind a year ago, never mind 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It is not something you can do part-time anymore. I repeat, SEO is not something you can do part-time anymore. You can't really outsource it to another country and hope that their programs will handle it. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You need someone who knows what they're doing, who lives and breathes this stuff. Somebody, anybody. Okay. Now, here's another little quick tidbit. Speaking of disavowing files, people have asked, because they were trying to get out of their penalty by 301ing, which doesn't work, by the way. The vast majority, 95% of the time doesn't work, the vast majority of the time. So let's say I had redapples.com, let's say it was hit by Penguin, 1 or 2, take your pick. And let's say I decided to forward it to 301 it, because I thought it was smart, to bluepurple.com. Unfortunately, that's not going to work. So now they have to go and disavow links. They're wondering, well, all my links are pointing to redapples.com, but I still have the penalty on bluepurple.com. Do I disavow the links on redapples.com, or do I disavow it on bluepurple.com? Well, the answer is both. The answer is it's not hurting anything, as long as you still have access to Webmaster Tools for both domains. It's not hurting anything to upload the same disavow file for both. And this is straight from John Mueller, who works for Google, so he has some idea what he's talking about. So the short answer is upload for both. And again, if you're disavowing links, make sure you know what the proper ones to disavow. Don't just trust some program. You have to actually get someone who knows what they're talking about to take a look. Okay. Authorship. Ever since SMX advanced, the word on the street has been authorship. And so people have been asking me, what's this deal with authorship? Is it great? The answer is yes, it's good. You definitely should get it. I already mentioned it. Why is it good? Well, I'll specifically mention why it's good. At the very least, it'll get you better SPEW ranking. You know SPEW, don't you? SPEW is an acronym that is short for Search Plus Your World. It is the blended results that Google provides when you're logged into any Google resource. And so if someone, authorship is tied, it can be tied to different profiles, but typically it's tied to Google+. And so if they find some kind of social correlation, like your friend +1 something, and therefore it's going to show higher on your +1 some author's article, and if that happens enough, then that author is going to start showing up higher for when you search, because all your friends have +1 a bunch of their stuff, right? So a bunch of that author's stuff. So you want to get authorship onto your pages as quickly as possible. You want to make sure that the pages you put them on are great, right? Or that funny, interesting, witty, sarcastic voice that people know, love, and enjoy. And so it'll get you, at the very least, it'll get you better SPEW ranking. It will also increase your click-through rate. Sometimes as high as 100%. Sometimes it'll even double the click-through rate, depending if you're the only one with the author snippet on the page, and depending on what other garbage Google's putting on the page to distract attention away from the organic results, yet again. But it can greatly increase your click-through rate. And the rumor is that it might even provide you with better global ranking, either directly or at least indirectly if users like and share what they find when they click through to go to your site. So of course, if you're going to increase the amount of traffic that's going to your site through using the author snippet to increase your click-through rate, or through any other means, quite frankly, you have to make sure that they like what they find. Because otherwise, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's like you let the doors open for the party before you cleaned your house. And so the first 100 people who came in, they hated it and they left right away, right? It's not metaphor day, okay? It's segue day. So that's the best metaphor you're going to get. Anyway, so that. Okay, the next thing. Another little quick little tidbit. FYI, the +1 button will not work for HTTPS URLs. Just in case you have the secure socket layer, HTTPS, being served on your site, and you have +1 buttons on those pages, that will not work. You cannot +1 an HTTPS page because they're supposed to be secure and private. Not only that, however, but if you have pages that are roboted out, or that have no index on them, if you have a +1 button on them and someone +1s them, then they will be put in the index and Google will crawl them. Yes, Google will ignore those directives if there's a +1 button on it and someone +1s it, because they figure that means everyone must love it because it's Google+. And that's what they think. So, make sure on any page you don't want to, if you have social buttons that are on every page on your site, you have no index on pages because you don't want them to show up in the index, you have to take off the +1 buttons on it, because if someone happens to +1 them, then they will show up in the index. Okay, and last but not least, Matt Cutts put out a video on July 1st. And then he said that in the future, they might start penalizing for duplicate or stock images. They currently do not penalize or provide any kind of demotion or use it in any kind of factor in Panda or any kind of quality algorithm, whether you have duplicate or stock images. However, he said that it seems to be a pretty good indication of low quality content, is that it's all duplicated or stock images. So it might be one tiny little factor they use out of a whole host of factors that give them kind of an idea whether or not this site might be a bad site or a low quality site. Okay, so that's about half an hour. That's about as long as I like to make these things. So kind of a hodgepodge, a potpourri, if you will, of SEO tidbits. Next week, I will be providing some very interesting information about, hopefully about the payday loans algorithm. I'll be providing that evidence that I want to make to show you exactly what the payday loans algorithm is looking for and to prove how it's kind of looking for the exact same thing Penguin 2 is as well. And I'll have a bunch of bombshell leaks from John Mueller that he put out in a hangout earlier this month. So watch out for that, and until such a time, good luck in the SERPs, and we'll see you soon.